Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. 2025 marks the 60th anniversary of the release of The Sound of Music, an enormously successful Hollywood film with fans all over the world. As with any story Hollywood translates to the silver screen, the film is a mix of fact and fiction. What is not fiction, however, is that the leading male protagonist, Captain Georg von Trapp, had served in the Austro-Hungarian Navy and was a decorated veteran of World War I. To explore this fascinating history, we are joined by Johanna II von Trapp and Shela Gobertina von Trapp, co-founders of the Georg Agathe Foundation, which honors the heritage of their grandparents and great-grandparents, Georg von Trapp and his first wife, Agathe Gobertina Whitehead. We are also joined by Boris Blazina, historian at the Institute of Lexicography at Zagreb, Croatia, and editor of the Croatian translation of Georg von Trapp's 1935 World War I memoir, published in 2022. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Amanda, for inviting us to participate in this World War I series podcast. And thank you to your listeners for expressing interest in Captain Georg von Trapp's life and naval career.
Absolutely. We are just delighted to have you all here with us today. Could you start us off by sharing a little bit of information about the family and early life of Captain von Trapp?
Most of my grandfather's formative years were spent on the Adriatic coast. He was born in 1880 in the ancient port town of Zara, which at that time belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Today, it is the city of Zadar in the country of Croatia. His father, Captain August von Trapp, was also a naval captain serving in the Austrian Imperial Navy. August had earned a hereditary knighthood by heroically saving the shipping crew of the SMS Saida I during a hurricane that swept through the Mediterranean around the island of Sicily. Georg's family lived in Pola, today Pula, Croatia, where the main port of the Austrian Imperial Navy was located. He had an older sister, Hede, and a younger brother, Werner. Life revolved around the Navy, music at home, and a loving guiding hand from both parents. When Georg was only 4 years old, a tragedy struck the Trapp family when August passed away from typhoid fever. From then on, his widowed mother, Hede von Trapp, dedicated her life to raising her children on a naval widow's pension. Initially, they spent time in Eisenach in the Duchy of Hesse, where Hede's family lived. Then Graz, Austria-Hungary, where the children went to school. They eventually returned to the Adriatic coast when Georg began his naval training. Before World War I, my grandfather had married Agathe Gobertina Whitehead. My grandmother was the granddaughter of Robert Whitehead, the inventor of the torpedo. Georg and Agathe actually met at the Whitehead Torpedo Factory, which is located on the outskirts of the port town of Fiume, which is today called Rijeka and is in Croatia. They moved to Pola, where Georg was stationed, and started a family.
Tell us about his naval career leading up to World War I.
Okay, before I start describing von Trapp's career, I think that for the sake of context, it would help to point out the sheer size and diversity of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which included not only Austria and Hungary, but also the lands that are today part of Czechia, Slovakia, Croatia, and many other countries of Central and Southeastern Europe. Its coastline stretched along the Adriatic Sea from Trieste, which is now northeast Italy, to the Bay of Kotor in Montenegro, and included the entire Croatian coastline. Therefore, it was a vast multicultural and multilingual and multi-ethnic empire. So this is why Georg began his training in Rijeka in Croatia today at the Maritime Academy at the age of 14. Like all naval officers, he studied many subjects, including German, Italian, French, oceanography, meteorology, naval tactics, naval law, and even to play the violin. It was actually mandatory for Austro-Hungarian naval officers to learn to play at least one musical instrument. Graduating at the age of 18, he began his service aboard the corvette Saida II, a wooden sailing ship, aboard which he circumnavigated the world via Malta, the Suez Canal, the Marquesas Islands, and on to Australia. Georg then served aboard the torpedo cruiser Zenta and did a second circumnavigation in 1899 and 1900, sailing from Pula via Suez to Colombo, Singapore, Hong Kong, and then Japan. However, at that time in China, the Boxer Rebellion erupted. Georg was called up to serve as part of the international forces that were sent to protect the foreign legations in Tianjin and Beijing. At the age of only 19, he served as a Marine and saw combat during the Battle of the Taku Forts. After this, Georg continued his education, completing 4 officers' courses, including sea mines, torpedoes, hot air balloon, and gunnery. Most other officers had only 1 or 2 such courses. He then volunteered to train aboard a new weapon, the submarine. Now, this was a pioneering and dangerous task, as nobody truly understood the capabilities of these new craft. There were no manuals, there were no navigational maps of any underwater obstructions, and the technology in them was quite dangerous. The gasoline motors ventilated into the craft, constantly threatening the crew with carbon monoxide poisoning. Just before World War I, Georg served aboard the coastal defense ship Monarch on a training mission, visiting Egypt and the Austro-Hungarian hospice in Jerusalem.
Wow, it's really such an incredible career even before World War I. Now, you've already given us a little bit of a taste of this, but give us another sense of what the Austro-Hungarian Navy's capabilities are on the eve of World War I. Where is it primarily operating? And again, just what are its capabilities when this war begins?
Right. The Habsburgs were not traditionally a naval power, but this had changed a lot by 1914. In the decades preceding the war, they invested a lot of funds and resources into building up their navy. But this didn't mean only commissioning ships. An idea called the spirit of the Navy was also developed at this time. And this referred to the way the Navy brought together people from all over Central and Southeast Europe and forged a sort of brotherhood between them. Officers needed to have at least some knowledge of several foreign languages in order to communicate with their crews. And in turn, these officers, including Georg, were acquainted with cultures and people that were different from their own. As regards its raw power, Austria-Hungary's navy was respectable, though not on the same level as, for example, the British Royal Navy, and even the French Navy outnumbered it significantly. However, when talking about a navy's strength, one must also keep in mind what its objectives are. So, unlike the British Navy, which was tasked with projecting power throughout the world and protecting a huge colonial empire, the Austro-Hungarian Navy's goal was limited to protecting the empire's only sea, the Adriatic, which is basically a large gulf. Not counting, it did have a single warship deployed in China because there was a small Austro-Hungarian concession there, but that's pretty negligible. Another advantage of Austria-Hungary was that its coastline had many islands and bays that could serve as ambush points, and the coastal terrain itself was quite rugged and very difficult to invade. The Allies quickly learned the folly of trying to move into the Adriatic after the French lost two of their cruisers to submarine attacks. And one of these was made by Georg von Trapp himself. I will get back to this a bit later. Instead, the Allies basically penned the Austro-Hungarian Navy up in the Adriatic by blockading it at the Strait of Otranto. And in turn, the Austro-Hungarians were mostly actually content to simply defend their coastline and to draw off a large number of Allied ships, which then had to be prepared to deal with the Austro-Hungarians instead of, for example, being deployed against Germany or maybe against the Ottoman Empire. However, this is where the Austro-Hungarian submarines come in, why they are important. Namely, most of the time, they could actually slip through this Allied blockade at Otranto and even enter the Mediterranean.
Now, it's said that Georg von Trapp was the most successful Austro-Hungarian submarine commander of the war. What can you tell us about his service and why he's given that title?
Yes, it is absolutely true. He was the most successful Austro-Hungarian submarine commander. Now, one might think that having any success as an Austro-Hungarian submarine captain was a feat in itself. Namely, Austria-Hungary's submarine force was quite weak at the beginning of the war. It had been somewhat neglected and had only 7 submarines altogether, and even at the beginning of the war, they were already obsolete. However, what it lacked in numbers and technology, it made up with some very talented and well-motivated crews and commanders, including Zdenko Hudecek, Rudolf Singule, and of course, Georg von Trapp. So, von Trapp actually began his wartime service as a torpedo boat commander, but he saw very little action, and he requested to be transferred to a submarine instead. His first command was the tiny U-5 in April 1915. That very same month, he managed to already sink the French armored cruiser Leon Gambetta near the Italian city of Otranto. As I've mentioned before, this actually greatly contributed to the Allied fleet's reluctance to enter the Adriatic Sea afterwards. It was also a very significant event because it was the first successful nighttime torpedo attack by a submarine in history. And it also came as something of a shock, as the general sort of the prevailing wisdom was that submarines should be mostly used to defend the coastline. And here we saw a submarine directly attacking and eliminating one of a powerful ship belonging to an enemy navy. And von Trapp's other major success as commander of the U-5 was the sinking of the Nereide, an Italian submarine, in August 1915 near the island of Palagruja in Croatia, or Pelagosa as it's known in Italian. This was another remarkable feat because the primitive technology of submarines in that era made it very difficult for one submarine to engage, and let alone sink another. But von Trapp managed to catch the Nereide in the middle of the night, just as it was preparing to submerge, and he managed to sink it with a torpedo before the Nereide fired its own. And von Trapp's next command was the U-14. This was originally a French submarine, the Career, that had been sunk, recovered, and refitted by the Austro-Hungarians. And this refitting process was partly done under Georg's supervision. As its commander, he sunk 11 Allied merchant ships during a 6-month cruise in the Mediterranean in 1917. Now, this was a difficult feat because the Allies were deploying increasingly complex anti-submarine weapons and tactics, such as nets, ships disguised to look helpless but actually hiding guns, sonars, convoys, and so on. He spent the final year of the war as the commander of the submarine base in the Bay of Kotor, today in Montenegro.
I think one of the wonderful things that I found on the Georg and Agathe Foundation website was the information about his service and just the immense tonnage that he was really responsible for sinking as that submarine commander. So I would encourage any of our listeners, if you want a little more detailed examination of that, we will put the foundation's website in the description of this podcast so that you can take a look at that. So where is he then when the war ends in 1918? And do we know what he felt about the end of the war?
Georg was relieved the war was over. At the beginning of the war, he had lost his brother Werner on the Russian front, and Agathe had lost her oldest brother, John Whitehead, in a flight training accident in England. As you can see, the brothers-in-law were commissioned on opposite sides. As Boris mentioned earlier, as commander of the U-boat station for the Adriatic, Georg was at the submarine base in the Bay of Kotor when the war ends. Today it is the Bay of Kotor in the country of Montenegro. His last act as a naval captain was hoisting and lowering the Austro-Hungarian naval flag to a 21-gun salute. With this, his 24-year naval career came to an end. His orders were to return home, which meant joining his wife and at that time 5 children in Austria at the Zeller Lake family compound, which belonged to his mother-in-law, Agathe Whitehead, Countess von Breuner. Upon losing the war, the Austrian Empire's lands were divided and the Adriatic coast was annexed to Italy. So for this reason, Georg could not bring his family back to their home in Pola, since now it was in Italian hands. They eventually moved to a town called Klosterneuburg, which is outside the city of Vienna. Georg had loved his naval career, the camaraderie of Navy life, and above all, the sea. It was a great loss to him, but together with his friends from the Navy, he found a new purpose and built 2 shipping enterprises that operated on the Danube and the North Baltic Sea.
He's a very highly decorated officer. Can you share some of the awards and honors he received before the end of his naval career?
The first combat-related award that he received was during the Boxer Rebellion I mentioned in China. So he was serving as a Marine in that conflict and fought at the Taku forts. This is some 60 kilometers southeast of Tianjin. For his bravery there, he was awarded the Silver Bravery Medal, 2nd class, but it was a truly grueling battle, and never in his life did he want to actually speak about it later. So we can only imagine how terrible it must have been for him. His most prominent reward earned during World War I, however, was the Knight's Cross of the Order of Leopold, which was awarded to him when he sank the Leon Gambetta. Some of his other awards include the Knight's Cross of the Order of the Iron Crown and a Silver Bravery Medal 1st class. He also won some foreign awards, such as the German Iron Cross in 1915 and the Ottoman Golden Merit Medal in 1916. His most prestigious award, however, was the Knight's Cross of the Order of Maria Theresa, which was awarded to him only in 1924 by a commission. This was the most prestigious Austro-Hungarian military award an officer could earn, as it was given only for acts of exceptional bravery and initiative in direct combat. Georg even requested to be buried much later while wearing this medal. And one should also mention that all of these awards, except the Order of Maria Theresa, were won when he was still only the equivalent US Navy rank would be lieutenant. So he was still basically a junior officer all of this time. And another thing that should be mentioned is von Trapp's opinion about this. So despite everything, all these awards he had won, despite being the most successful Austro-Hungarian Naval submarine commander. He personally said that his greatest wartime success was that none of the men under his command died. And at one point, when he earned one of his medals, he actually refused to accept it until all of his men were honored as well, as it was a team effort. And his men loved him for this.
Very interesting. So we've already mentioned it a little bit, but after the war, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is dissolved, Austria is landlocked, and his naval career ends. In the 1965 movie, there's a scene where he receives the offer of a commission in the German Navy after the Anschluss. Did this really happen?
Yes, it did. After Germany annexed Austria in 1938, the Anschluss, as you mentioned, Georg was offered command of a German submarine that, in his own words, would have made his previous ships look like Noah's Ark. And according to the memoirs of his second wife, Maria, the commission offer also mentioned that he would be tasked with eventually establishing a submarine base in the Adriatic Sea and then expanding further into the Mediterranean. So this is why, in addition to his personal, well, he was personally disgusted with the Nazis. He did not like them one bit. Georg turned the offer down. Namely, he correctly understood that the mention of establishing bases in the Adriatic and later the Mediterranean meant that the Nazis were preparing for a major war, and he wanted no part of this. Very soon after, fearing that the Nazis would retaliate and against his family, he quietly led them out of Austria and boarded a train for Italy, leaving behind pretty much their old lives and then spending almost everything they had to pay for passage to the US.
So at the memorial, our mission is primarily telling the story of General Douglas MacArthur. And he served during World War I with the 42nd Rainbow Division. And at the end of World War II, years later, his beloved 42nd Division ends up in Salzburg on occupation duty. Now, Salzburg at the time is in very desperate need of aid, and the commander of the 42nd reaches out to the von Trapp family. So tell us a little bit about this. Where is the family at this point, and how do they respond to this question?
A great question, Amanda. I agree with you. I think it's important to first give a little bit of background. So by the end of the war, my great-grandfather and family have already been living in the United States for 6 years after leaving Europe. Georg was married to his second wife, Maria Augusta, and the family now consisted of 10 children. 7 from Agathe, who had passed away in 1922, and 3 from Maria Augusta. For about a decade, the family had established a very successful singing career and were performing on average of over 100 concerts a year. And at the time, the 2 eldest sons had enlisted in the US Army and were over in Europe. After the war, initially the family sent clothes and supplies to Georg's old Navy officers and families. And then soon after, they received a plea for help, as you mentioned, from Major Collins with the 42nd Rainbow Division. And it's really interesting that MacArthur had a connection with the Rainbow Division, and so too now the Von Trapps. And Collins very sadly shared that starvation was rampant and citizens were really facing life and death situations throughout Austria. And in response, the family used their tours, their singing tours, as a way to collect clothing and food at each location, as well as donating souvenir proceeds to send aid to Austria. They officially established the Trapp Family Austrian Relief. And by 1947, the family had sent 3,000 meals facilitated by the organization called CARE. Now, sadly, that same year, Georg passed away, but the family continued the efforts for another 4 years. And, we are very obviously very proud of the family's response.
What a wonderful legacy that they leave and continue to leave. How is Captain Von Trapp's service viewed by the Austrian armed forces today?
Today, his naval service is viewed very favorably by the Austrian Armed Forces. In 1995, the graduating officers class of the Military Academy in Wiener Neustadt, Austria, chose him as their namesake. This graduating class is called Ritter von Trapp, meaning Knight von Trapp. They wanted to honor Georg for his example of personal bravery, his leadership as U-boat commander, and his military know-how during World War I.
Final thoughts. What have we missed, and would you like to tell us a little bit more about the foundation?
Well, yes, thank you, Amanda, for having us all on to share a bit more about my great grandfather. We're always happy to bring more of his story to life. I think a fun fact to share about Georg's 1935 World War I memoir called The Last Salute is that it was originally published in German, and since then it has been translated into French, English, Polish, Hungarian, Russian, and most recently, as mentioned, Croatian. If your audience is interested to learn more details about Georg, his naval career, and family, they can find a lot of free information on the Foundation's websites, as well as the English version of his memoir is also available in our web shop. A bit more about the Foundation. The Georg and Agathe Foundation's mission is to champion the arts, promote peace, and preserve history. We have many archival projects underway for the Von Trapp and Whitehead heritage, including documenting the Trapp family singers' 2,000 plus concerts, collecting Your Sound of Music stories from fans and global productions, as well as collaboration projects about the Whitehead torpedo and the Austro-Hungarian Navy. We would love to hear from any of your listeners if they or someone they know has an ancestor in their family tree that once served in the Austro-Hungarian Navy, since we are collecting their stories also to preserve. We think that descendants are scattered around the globe and we'd like to find them. People can learn more, donate, contact us, and support our efforts by visiting our website at georgandagathe.org. I'll spell that out. It's GeorgAgathe.org. And our other site, vontrapp.org, vontrapp.org, that celebrates the Trapp family singers. We look forward to keeping in touch with you and your listeners.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.